10 years ago, I published a piece on sharing economy. I actually made the prediction that this would really be something which would shake up the economy a lot. And in a way, I must say, I'm a little bit disappointed. I think we value the real option we have in our hand when we have ownership higher than I expected then.
So, herzlichen Dank den beiden Rednern. Sie haben uns das Thema näher gebracht, das Thema Sharing Economy, Promise and Peril. Ich freue mich jetzt, das Ganze zu vertiefen in der Diskussion. Ich stelle kurz die beiden Mitpanelisten vor. In der Mitte haben wir Dr. Raoul Stöckle, er ist Verwaltungsratspräsident und momentan CEO ad interim der Mobility-Genossenschaft. Er war auch beteiligt am Aufbau von Sharely, der größten Sharing-Plattform der Schweiz für Alltagsgegenstände, Bohrmaschinen, Kercher und so weiter. Und er war Co-Gründer von Bond, Bikes on Demand, ein E-Bike-Sharing-Angebot. Und dann zu meiner nahen Linken haben wir Dr. Konrad Hummler, Sie kennen ihn, er ist Vizepräsident des Stiftungsrats der Progress Foundation. Wie immer, wir machen das so, dass wir den größten Teil der Diskussion auf Englisch führen. Aber wenn sich jemand wohler fühlt auf Deutsch, dann machen wir das bilingual. Raoul, I'd like to take or the two new panelists into the discussion. Raoul, we've heard the idea of the sharing economy from an economic and theoretical perspective. Now you can give us the practitioner's view here. You've been in and involved with the sharing economy for many years. So just as a brief intro for a couple of minutes, share your thoughts on what you've heard from the two speakers, and also share with us, based on your experience, what works in the sharing economy and what does not work.
Thanks a lot for having me here. Not an easy question to start. I've been involved in more platform sharing economy corporates, and as well as those who actually own their own assets. And there's a couple of differences. So the thing is, if you have platforms, what is obvious is that there's always more demand on renting stuff rather than borrowing stuff. So I've been involved in Charou, that's a peer-to-peer car sharing in Switzerland, where you can kind of get the car of your neighbor or down the street. And there are many more cars that have been rented out, or there's an overhang on demand rather than people who are willing to put their own cars in there. And that's for different reasons, because, you know, it's one thing is you don't want anyone else to maybe smoke in your car or have their pets in the car and so on, because it's your property and you want to use it. The second thing is it's more optionality. You have your own car because you don't really know when you're going to use it. And you always have like a big car, especially in the States, I guess, because you have to, at one point you want to transport something or you want to go further distance and so on. So you have a car that kind of fits all the different needs, although most of the time you just have short trips down to the city. And because of this optionality, you don't want to rent it out because you don't know if you're going to need it during the time you're renting it out. And that's also one of the things that might hamper, Turo's example, where people give their car to someone else. It's maybe they don't want anyone else using it because they know how they're going to treat it, but also what happens if I have to return early? Is my car going to be there? And if you experience this once, you're never going to rent it out again. So what we find is that because there's an overhang on people wanting to rent, the companies start to have their own assets because they're always available. So you kind of put in more and more of your own assets. For Sharely, we're a platform where you can rent your neighbor's drill or stand-up paddle and all these kind of things. But then we found out that there's a lot of demand for drones or for Kercher, where you have to clean the floor. And so we kind of acquired a few of those to always have some available because there's a lot of demand for it. And with Mobility, the car-sharing company, we went all the way that we said, okay, the demand for cars is always bigger than the people who want to put their cars into the platform. They were just going to put our own cars. So kind of a long story short is, because of this overhang, this optionality, the platforms that thrive most are the ones who actually own their own assets. which is kind of a contrast to economic belief that, the sharing, that you want to have an asset that's kind of reuse or overcapacity. But especially with cars, the companies I see that work are the ones who have their own cars or assets. Uber, it's more the chauffeur at the moment. At one point, if you have like self-driving cars, autonomous cars, that might switch, because then everyone who has a car can put their system in, and then maybe it's replacing the chauffeurs rather than the cars. But at the moment, you own your own chauffeurs. It's kind of better off than having everyone else driving people around. Also, that's why Uber kind of switched to this today's model where we have like more professional Uber drivers.
Thanks. Konrad, to get you into the discussion as well, what were the main thoughts that went through your head when you heard the two speakers?
Well, I published 10 years ago, I published a piece on sharing economy, and I did some predictions because that was my job at the time. And I actually made the prediction that this would really be something which would shake up the economy and society a lot. And in a way, I must say, I'm a little bit disappointed. I don't want to, but it was not really this big wave. Yes, it came, we got used, but on the other side, we saw, well, I mean, if I ask you in the room who still owns a car and is not just a customer of yours, then I would say 90% would raise the hand. And there is a reason why and it's not only regulation, there's a reason why it didn't just go this way. And I believe there's still there's some as a charm to property rights and to own something. It's probably privacy. I mean, no smoking in the car and smoke sharing like that. And there is, of course, what you also say is the real option you have in your hand, because it's, of course, you can have it any time. Yes, with Uber it's also true, and they change the price and so on. Yes, but not always. Sometimes when there is really a thunderstorm in New York, then it's impossible. But with the car, you could then still drive. So I think we value the real option we have in our hand when we have ownership higher than I expected then. And why did I this forecast? Because I wanted to have an idea on the deflationary force behind the whole thing. Because, I mean, that's of course extremely important, and I still believe that this whole thing with new monetary theory is actually only and was only possible to think about this kind of because we had, of course, this better use of capacities and of course then higher productivity. But anyway, we are there and we are amidst, and perhaps it's just a wave, and then it goes a little bit back, and then it comes again.
But so maybe it can be said, like when you did the prediction 10 years ago, you underestimated how highly people value their perceived optionality they get by owning stuff, right? And you said, I mean, that's an important point. You said you wanted to get a feeling of the deflationary force that will come out of the sharing economy. Now, Michael, you in your presentation, you said basically towards the end of your presentation, this is hugely deflationary because prices will drop. Now, do you see a contradiction there, or would you also agree that the perceived optionality is valued so highly by individuals that we might not quite get to a point where it really gets to be this hugely deflationary force by people just not owning stuff anymore?
I've already had my chance to talk, and so I'm interested in what the other panelists have to say. But let me say briefly, I think that we're missing some of the deflationary effects that are happening because it's very difficult to notice them. A lot of it is wages. A lot of things are... I went to Toledo, Ohio, to rent a car, and when I got there, my phone buzzed and it gave me a 4-digit code. I went outside and there was a box. I pressed in the 4-digit code and I got the key. There used to be 3 people who worked at the Hertz office in Toledo, Ohio. There are none now. Every day they park the cars, they put the key in the box, they set it up with the codes, and from 4 p.m. onward, there's no one. It's all automatic, and you turn it back in. So some of the deflationary forces are not things that we see where the prices are dropping. There's just things that are disappearing that are going to put downward wage prices, downward pressures on other things. And the U.S. response has been in some cases to say, well, we need minimum wage. So if you increase the minimum wage, you hasten the rapidity with which this transformation will take place. So we're actually chasing after our own shadows. Service jobs are disappearing. We're raising minimum wages, which means that we're going to eliminate more and more of these jobs. So the deflationary pressures we're resisting by having a minimum wage law.
But if you allow an add-on on that, I mean, over the past 4 years, there was, especially in the US, no deflationary force. We had inflationary forces pretty much everywhere, and labor shortages. Labor was scarce pretty much everywhere. Would you say that was just a counter trend in an otherwise deflationary mega trend that will just continue destroying jobs?
You know that my answer is transaction costs. The difficulty is that when you say there's a labor shortage, there's not a net labor shortage. What we have is there's many skilled positions for which we can't hire people. But the labor force participation rate has fallen from the upper 70s to the 60s. So many people are no longer even looking for jobs, and they're not being counted as unemployed. So what we're seeing is many skilled jobs going unfilled, but more and more unskilled people not working and not even looking for jobs. So that's where the deflationary pressure is happening. The US is, and there's a third factor, and that is the irresistible inflationary pressures of US monetary policy in between 2010 and 2012, and again between 2020 and 2022. So no deflationary force could have withstood that. Those prices are going to go up if you inflate the money supply that much.
Now, pretty much all the statements from the 4 of you went towards the direction of, if I phrase it somewhat differently, when we talk about the sharing economy today, it's not so much me renting out my drill to the people in this room. It's a platform economy, and platform economies are usually dominated by a few winner-takes-all companies. Basically, the company that manages to gain most network effects wins that market, and it owns that market. And that's what I'm aiming at. Are we really dealing with new monopolies here, and which basically extract a lot of the rent that you know can be made in this business? Justus.
Well, I wouldn't say transaction costs. I would say the other answer that's always right. I would say it depends. That's even right for lawyers. In some markets, obviously, we have high concentration tendencies. One key factor is really that sort of economists have worked out is how easy is it to what we call multi-home? How easy is it to be on 2 platforms at the same or in one short time after another? Yeah, and if that is reasonably easy, actually, then we see competition even in platform markets. So, for example, in Germany, I know there's in real estate, we don't have a dominant company yet. Yeah, there are still competing real estate platforms because it's comparatively easy. Well, if you look for real estate, it's really easy to just visit 1, 2, or 3 platforms. But even if you want to rent out or sell your house, it's still comparatively easy just to list it on 2 of these platforms. Yeah, in some other markets, the network effects are simply too strong. Let's say my prime example is always eBay, because if I I get an, I don't know what, ugly picture as a birthday present, and I want to get rid of it, I can just put it onto one platform, because it may be more difficult to put it on 3 platforms at the same time, because I only have one of these pictures to sell in the end. And then, of course, I go where I think it's most likely that there is somebody crazy enough to buy it. Yeah, and that may be because I know that most people who look for weird stuff or like used stuff of some sort go to eBay, will say very likely that I also go to eBay. Yeah, so it depends a bit on what type of market we are looking at.
Excuse me for interrupting, but when we talk about the sharing economy in particular, Uber, Airbnb, and so on, aren't these, in the meantime, have they grown to monopolistic platforms that own their market?
Let's look at Airbnb. We've seen that Booking has started to list many more what we would sort of moved away from hotels only also to apartments. Yeah, we see if you go to, let's say, to the Baltic Sea in Germany, to the Ostsee, you will find a lot of local platforms still that rent out apartments there. So yes, Airbnb may be the sort of a huge platform in many markets, but it's we see it also attracts competition, especially from Booking and other big platforms, which try then to move into that market as soon as you make a lot of money in these markets.
Konrad first and then Raoul.
Yes, I ask you back. I mean, is an oligopoly of platforms a real problem? I mean, you have in Zurich also only one marketplace, and is that the problem that we have only one marketplace where you can buy the vegetable? No, actually not, because you have always the possibility that there are market entrances, and as long as this is possible, and as you say, there are always alternative platforms. The only thing is to change between platforms are also information and transaction costs, and that's of course a little bit the problem. But you can, and as long as you can, I think they cannot really use a monopoly power. Yes, I mean perhaps a little rent, but okay. I mean that's the economy.
Well,
well, I think size does matter. Mobility, we have around 3,500 cars, and 50% of the cost is fixed cost. It's systems, it's offices, headquarters, staff, and so on. And 50% is direct costs, like fuel, like cars, depreciation, and so on. So if you would have less cars, then the fixed cost would just be overburdening. So we have to have more and more cars. That's also the strategy we have. We want to increase now the number of cars on the street. We have a lot of smaller car rentals out there, and they are struggling. They can do well if it's really small, if you just have, and you have like this one, location where you have one guy handing out the keys. But as soon as you want to grow, there's like this increasing cost for systems and data privacy and all these things that you have to take care of if you have a certain size that just prohibits another company in Switzerland being our competitor. So our main competitor, and that's maybe the reason why I don't see a deflationary force, is the private-owned car. And that's kind of fixed cost. And there's not much reason for us to go lower in price as long as we're competing against the private car. So yes, we have more and more synergies, and we use less and less staff and so on. But why would we lower prices? We just increase profits, and we do other stuff with it. So that's kind of the reason why in Switzerland for car sharing, car rentals, there's no real competition.
Let's take another example that you've also been involved with, bike sharing. Now we usually see Lime, both the bikes and those, you call it trottinettes. Mm-hmm. Are these winner-takes-all markets?
Again, size. So the business model we have this e-bike sharing, so not like the mass produce. We have like more high-end bikes, and we had like 500 in Zurich and 6 different countries. We launched the same systems, and there's a lot of invest required for systems and all these things. I think there's a limited number of bikes that you can use in one system. The thing is, the people uses are for convenience and speed and so on. The money we didn't make from the rides, we made from data. So what we did is, if you have a bike sharing company, in the morning everyone takes at the train station and goes out to office, and in the evening they go back. So it's kind of pulsating. But the bike you need is never at the place you are. And especially for bikes, less so for cars, you want to have it in walking distance. So we came up with a system where we had these bonus zones, where if you drop the bike in this bonus zone, you get a reward, you get a free ride or something back. And what we figure out, they work. Like 20% of the people actually go to those zones and drop the bike at Bellevue rather than Stadelhofen because they get a free ride. And so, and we did this for operational reasons to use it for redistributing. We figured out that if we can bring people to a certain location, we can sell those bonus zones. So we went to Starbucks and McDonald's and so on. They bought the bonus zones because people were dropping the bikes in front of the McDonald's. So most of the revenue is not coming from the bike rides, but from us selling bonus zones. So we completely flipped the business model to something where the ride is not important, but everything else, data or location and so on. So, but to achieve these things, you need a certain size. You need a certain number of people using your service. And that's the goal, especially like for China, it's more about transaction, and they invented their own coins. And they're making a lot of money because of the transactions occurring around the travel, but not the travel itself. So the business model completely switched. And that's also one of the reasons why public bike, still the old-fashioned station-based bikes, they rely on subsidies from the state because they never had the necessity to invent their own business models.
Maybe a last question on that, and I'll get to you, Justus, in a second. Why is the state even involving itself in something like bike sharing?
Zurich likes bikes. It's a new technology, new process, new business model, and they want to somehow control it, because if everyone's starting to share their own things, it's kind of out of control. So yeah, I think it's gonna, at one point they're gonna give up on it, because it just doesn't make sense to have, you see pictures, because you have these bikes pulsating from one public bike station to another, for example, from Etia Zentrum to Hönkerberg, and you see the e-bikes always go up to Hönkerberg and they take the regular bikes going downhill. So they have to swap the bikes all the time. And they use Staatsangestellte who actually move the bikes all the time, and there's no business model behind it. And that just doesn't work. So it's kind of a hobby we have here.
What a great story.
Yeah. Justus, obviously, when we talk about the perils, the first point I made was, are there monopolistic structures?
Yeah. Let me mention something. Yeah, we have to maybe distinguish between what sort of economists may have a somewhat different use of the word platform, because typically we talk about platforms, or sometimes we call them two-sided markets, if we really bring together two different sides of the market. For example, there are very, very many sellers potential and very many buyers, or let's say users and renters and so on. Yeah, and then it's mainly a matching, or like the intermediation function that the platform performs. And there, a lot is driven by network effects. Yeah, everybody wants to go where everybody goes because everybody goes. Yeah, so that's a network effect. In other markets, we have what I would call classical economies of scale, which we always had. Like in the bike renting business, I would say this may be just classical, or car sort of renting or sharing business, maybe classical economies of scale. Yeah, because there is no matching of buyers and sellers. It's just sort of, obviously there may be economies of scale in this industry because it's very high fixed cost intensity, and then it's a matter of what's the level of demand and what sort of, at what point we sort of have exploited the economies of scale. Yeah, even in, let's say, if you go to an island, even a supermarket is a natural monopoly typically, because it's only demand there's only for one supermarket in that sense. But that's nothing new in that sense. Yeah, and of course there may be we can discuss whether sort of the fixed cost intensity over the entire economy has increased. But I would think that the opposite is true. That actually fixed costs have become less important because we have the sharing economy. You can buy everything as a service. Yeah, infrastructure as a service, computing as a service. I don't know what is a service. Yeah, that means typically you sort of transform fixed costs into variable costs, which typically allow for more competition rather than less competition, at least in the markets who use these type of services.
Konrad?
I think it's also important to think about the future. We now know that we have platforms that they work and fantastically, they work fantastically, but there are some fields in society where there could be a little bit more. For instance, human capital above 65. There are not so many platforms which are actually active in this sharing, potential sharing economy of human resources above 65.
It's a business model.
Of course, it's a business model. You could do great things, and then we wouldn't have this Fachkräftemangel, which is anyway something stupid. But anyway, there's a second thing I would say for the future. A balance of a bank can actually also be shared, not through the means of the bank, but actually through a platform. And it already exists, but it has not taken off really. But it's possible. And then you don't have banks anymore. That would be a great future.
Now, when the question is, the promise and or the peril, often in the discussion when it comes to labor, the promise side is, basically everyone can be a micro-entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. The peril side usually is, and that's something that our regulatory bodies have a lot of trouble grappling with, is it's blurring the lines of what we used to understand as someone being employed or a contractor or an entrepreneur. And that's, Uber, for example, is a prime example of how our regulatory bodies cannot really deal with it. Now, the question to you, Michael, in terms of what it does to the labor force, I'd like to read a quote, and it's a quote from Oren Cass, who's the founder of the American Compass and an advisor to J.D. Vance, so he's not a labor economist. He says, "The sharing economy is a mirage. It redistributes risks from companies to workers." Or in other words, it's creating a new precariat. Would you agree with that?
Especially true in the United States because we don't have public medical insurance. You only have medical insurance for the most part if you have a job. And the job has to be of the 40-hour-a-week sort. So it is obvious. Both things can be true. I've debated Oren a couple of times about this. He wants a binary. Both things can be true. It is true that a lot of the risk is being transferred to individuals, particularly in the U.S. system. The gig economy, let me give an example of the gig economy very briefly. If you want to make a movie in Hollywood, there's 170 different disciplines that are part of making a movie. You go to LinkedIn, you find all of these people by their reputations, you hire them, and on the first day of the movie, the 170 people show up, they each know their roles, and they're articulated like a team. We spend 4 months making the movie, they get paid. They get paid a substantial amount because they have a reputation that they can use to get these kind of jobs. At the end, they break up, and then there's a kaleidoscopic reformation. So these gigs are temporary firms, the transactions cost of forming which are reduced by having something like LinkedIn. So that sort of gig economy, where I have some kind of specialized skill that will allow me to work 5-6 months a year and get a very substantial income, is what I think people are going to have to focus on. Oren wants them to work in steel factories. They just have to all go work in steel factories like it was 1954.
But, okay, I can give you another quote as well to dig a little deeper.
He says a lot
there.
of stuff.
This one is actually not from Oren, but from Lawrence Katz, who's a labor economist at Harvard. Calling gig workers entrepreneurs is the biggest con of the sharing economy.
And that's true for many very poor people. There is no question that if the gig economy starts, there are many people that, for a variety of reasons, They're not able, they're not interested, there's a lot of risk, they don't have a sense of entrepreneurship. So I take a sort of Israel Kirzner view of everyone's an entrepreneur. There's not a shortage of entrepreneur in many African countries. If you spend time in African countries, everybody's selling stuff. Everybody has some kind of hustle. It's that there are institutional barriers for making entrepreneurship possible and effective. So I see, and then Konrad said this quite rightly, what we have to do is get rid of entry barriers. If we get rid of entry barriers, competition will take care of itself. And some of that's true in labor markets. We have to have better education systems and give people a sense of hope, some positive, optimistic vision of the future. But he's not wrong. There is a group of people for whom it is true. At present, there's no way they can create their own brand. That's sort of, you can create your own brand on LinkedIn. That's right, it's not going to happen. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't allow it for most people, because it is still the path to prosperity.
Because both of you, in your, I'll get to you in a second, both of you in your presentation, you focused mainly on the promise. Justus, you talked a little bit about externalities, about the perils. In your view, which are the largest or the perils that we really should talk about when it comes to the sharing economy?
My impression is that the peril I'm more concerned about most is over-regulation, actually, by the government. Yeah, that prevents actually from sharing models to prosper, and often that is built on some sort of strange comparison. Let's say often, and I made this experience with Uber quite a bit. Uber is compared to a perfect world. Yeah, something that has been called by them that's Nirvana approach 60 years ago almost. Yeah, so if we then look in detail, for example, yeah, let's take again the example of the ride-hailing services. Yeah, typically, if you work as a cab driver, a high percentage of your income is also at risk, because the typical payment, at least in Germany, is that you have to be paid the minimum wage if you find a cab company that is really paying the minimum wage, because there's a lot actually who are sort of on the edge of legality at least. And then typically you get something like 30% or something of the income that you generate. So that is quite something that is at risk already. And if you then compare what they really earn, you also have to make a decent comparison, because I found it interesting. A lot of drivers that sort of use this that are working for ride-hailing services are not necessarily doing it as a full-time job. It's more as an add-on. They have a different job and say, okay, I can do this like 3 hours a day or a day on the weekend or something. So the necessity to make a living out of that is quite different than something who says, I want to have a 40 hours week and they have to earn everything in 40 hours, which is quite uncommon actually for cab drivers in Germany, that they only work 40 hours. A lot of them work more right now already. So I think if you make the sort of comparison that the true counterfactual, let's say, that exists in reality and not the one that exists in our sort of romantic minds, then I think I see much less of a peril of this gig working economy. Maybe one last sentence. What really has been to the detriment of the cab drivers has been the reduction in the number of licenses, or the scarce licenses. Why is that? Typically, in almost all countries of the world, cab drivers are people who they don't need any sort of education in some sense. Yeah, it's a typical work for migrants. You arrive in a country, what can you do? You can drive a car. Yeah, so that is something that you can do. And if you sort of keep the number of licenses reduced, there's a lot of competition to be one of the drivers who gets actually a job at a cab company. Yeah, and the more competition there is for being a cab driver, of course, that suppresses your wages in the end. Yeah, so I think the other way around is probably true. If we sort of allow for more sort of license or more cabs, yeah, it's much easier to become a cab driver and then really actually empower them rather than reduce their power, at least for those who want to be a cab driver.
Now we have to slowly come to a close, but when we look into the future, And Konrad, you said in the beginning that 10 years ago you made your predictions of what the sharing economy will make possible. And you said you were kind of disappointed that we only got so far, right? Now, you all said in your statements, the sharing economy per se is not something new, it's been evolving, but you also said that with technology and with smartphones and so on, which basically just made it possible to match and to lower transaction costs. Now, I'd like to hear from all of you, looking into the future, 10 years from now, what would your prediction be? What will we just normally use from the sharing economy? I.e., will we still own cars? Will it basically just be incrementally further from where we are today? Or do you see something more fundamental happening? Konrad.
May I start?
Sure.
I think it will go on, and it will go on in a faster pace, because we have now the next technological revolution, and that's AI. And with AI, for instance, I could pick any of more than 65 among you and have wonderful things done. So this will help the whole thing to that the platforms become more intelligent, and not only for a hole in the wall, but for any service we might want to have. So this will be a wonderful time next 10 years.
Justus, next.
Something that I thought about. If I want to have a hole in the wall, I always use the sharing economy, because I called the craftsman who would bring the drilling machine. But anyway, I'm also hopeful that we will see an increase, and I'm very optimistic that we will see it in everything that is B2B, because there's less of a concern. We see cloud computing and all these services that are gaining pace, because it's basically a tool to variabilize your fixed cost in the end, and that is also good because it increases competition in most markets. So I'm hopeful there. With the B2C market, I would be hopeful that we see less regulation, there be an increase in the sharing economy, but in Europe everything is moving not so fast at the moment, let's say.
Raoul.
We just decided on a new strategy, and we will double the number of cars for mobility in the next 5 years. So we definitely see a big future in sharing economy.
And apart from the business that you're in right now, car sharing, what else, when you would look 10 years ahead, what else do you think will be perfectly normal then?
Well, my big hope is in today's youth. I think nutzen statt besitzen, so to actually get the holes rather than the drill, is more prevalent. So with the younger people, less focus on possession, I think this will change, and everything will be more and more shared. Yeah.
Thank you. Michael, you had the first word, you'll get the last.
I appreciate that. I think that there will be a trend towards urbanization, especially among young people. So if you look at the 28 of the OECD countries, they're going to hit peak population somewhere between 2030 and 2050. So almost all the countries in the developed world are going to hit peak population, which means that populations are going to start to age. Combine this with the improvements of the sharing economy if you have density, if you can deliver things very quickly. And I think a lot of rural areas are going to be depopulated in a number. You can see this now in Italy, Japan, Korea, just empty villages. There's going to be a move towards urbanization. It's going to accelerate as young people more and more leave the rural areas. And I think that's a trend we just haven't thought about.
We'll take that as a closing statement. First, please join me in thanking Justus Haucap, Michael Munger, Raoul Stöckle, and Konrad Hummler. And I hand it over to Gary. We can win.
Ja, just, meine Damen und Herren, bevor ich Sie zum Apero Risch einen Stock höher entlasse, Einige Worte noch über unsere Arbeit. Sie war dank Ihres Zuspruchs und Ihrer Unterstützung heuer sehr intensiv. Wir haben 2 Publikationen herausgebracht. Ringen um Freiheit, die erste Geschichte des Liberalismus, nicht der FDP, aber zum Teil der FDP in der Schweiz, von René Lüchinger, Peter Schürmann und mir, sowie vom Umgang mit Amerika von Ivan Adamovic und Konrad Hummler. Letztere Schrift wurde für uns zum eigentlichen Bestseller. Sie führte zu Interviews und Artikeln in vielen Medien und fand auch in Deutschland sowie dank einer englischen Ausgabe in den USA Beachtung. Sie war mitverantwortlich dafür, dass wir dieses Jahr statt 2 gleich 4 größere, meist ausgebuchte Konferenzen durchführten. Die Sonderveranstaltung Deutschland vor den Wahlen, was uns Ludwig Erhard heute zu sagen hat. Im Februar die 59. Economic Conference Managing the Challenge of Migration im Mai. Den kurzfristig aufgegleisten Anlass ist Wahnsinn auch, so hat es doch Methode, zu unserer Amerika-Publikation im Juni und nun eben die 60. Economic Conference. Für nächstes Jahr sind bis zu 3 Publikationen geplant. Ferner wollen wir im März die 61. Economic Conference dem Dollar widmen und im Herbst die 62. Economic Conference der Verfassung der USA, die 250 Jahre alt wird. Möglich ist daneben erneut eine Sonderveranstaltung. Wir halten Sie informiert, unter anderem mit unserem Newsletter. Ja, und jetzt, Sie warten sicher schon lange auf den Aufruf, uns zu unterstützen. Ich halte mich kurz. Wir konnten 2025 die Zahl der Förderer um über 60% auf ungefähr 300 steigern. Das bedeutet, die große Mehrheit von Ihnen zählt daher bereits zu unseren Fördern. Und die wenigen, die es noch nicht sind, werden dieser Mehrheit sicher nicht nachstehen wollen. Und weil unser Jahresbeitrag so niedrig ist, gibt es übrigens viele freiwillige Aufrundungen oder großzügige höhere Beträge. Wir sind auch ziemlich modern. Kurzentschlossene können beim Empfang gleich mit Twint bezahlen. Es liegen auch Einzahlungsscheine bereit und ein Besuch auf unserer Website, der sich ohnehin lohnen würde, hilft Spendenwilligen mit einem QR-Code weiter. Wir hoffen natürlich sehr, dass uns nicht nur all die langjährigen Spender, sondern auch die dieses Jahr neu dazugestoßenen und die nun noch im letzten Moment aufspringenden dann weiterhin die Treue halten. Damit bedanke ich mich meinerseits bei allen Mitwirkenden des heutigen Anlasses, den Referenten, Diskutanten, dem Moderator, der vorher den Applaus nur auf den Rest des Panels geleitet hat, und den Kräften im Hintergrund, meiner Kollegin und meinen Kollegen im Stiftungsrat, vor allem aber bei Ihnen für Ihr anhaltendes Interesse und Ihre Bereitschaft, sich auch immer wieder auf neue Themen wie heute einzulassen. Auch das, meine Damen und Herren, gehört zu einer liberalen, offenen Gesellschaft. Und nun wünsche ich anregende Gespräche beim Apéro-Riche und dann eine gute Rückkehr, entweder an den Arbeitsplatz oder nach Hause. Bleiben Sie uns gewogen.